Good morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Good
Rabbi.
morning.
Good Chodesh Tov. So we are in the middle of Perek Zion, chapter 7, Mishna Beis, the second Mishnah of the chapter. That's listing the 39 Avos Malachas, the 39 primary forms of forbidden activity on Shabbos. So the last one we left off with was Hamesech. Mesech is translated as warping, when you lay out the warp threads. Okay, so now we're up to the next malacha, again, that deals with weaving, where it says, Va'isa shei batei nirin. Right there. You got it?
Yeah, someplace. Yeah.
Okay. So the next malacha, which again is part of the weaving process, which we're doing the best that we can here to explain them and to understand them, is Va'isa shtei batei nirin. The article translates, but Isa Shnei Batei Nirin. He makes two Batei Nirin, means they translate it as setting two heddles.
Setting two.
Setting two heddles. Heddles. All right, so here we go. The weaving process described in the previous note, okay, where basically you lay out the warp threads and then the weft thread snakes in and out. So the process is made easier by using a loom or other device that can raise every alternate warp thread at the same time. Follow that? The standard method of raising alternate threads together is to use heddles. I'll show you a picture in a second. A heddle is a string or rod that has a ring called an eye in the center. Okay, there are several types of looms, each with a different arrangement of heddles. A common type of loom has a large roller at each of its two ends. A roller, okay. Between these rollers are two frames, one in front of the other, that are called harnesses. The heddles extend from the top to the bottom of each harness. Okay, so let's see if we can get a little bit better understanding with these pictures. Now, this picture is really their second picture that the art scroll shows. I just want to show you what example will be of these rollers. You see at the end these large round things, and that's what the warp threads are extended to from one to the other, from one roller to the other. Now, these heddles that I mentioned before are this picture here on the bottom, where basically you have a frame, right? And you have, let's say, call it a rod or a string with a eye in the middle. Okay? This whole thing is called a heddle. Now, what's going to be happening with these things? Actually, that's right. The whole thing's not called a heddle. The whole thing is called a harness. And the strings with the eye in it are called heddles. Okay. After the warp threads are mounted onto the roller on one side of the loom, they are passed through these harnesses to the roller on the other side of the loom. Now, the first warp thread is inserted through the eye of a heddle. Then don't forget, there's two of these harnesses in front of it, in front of each other, next to each other. You've got a roller, you've got a harness, and a roller. Okay. Now, the first warp thread is inserted through the eye of a heddle on the first harness, and between two adjacent heddles on the second harness. Now, this picture may not be so easy to see. Let me just read a little bit more. The next warp thread is treated in the opposite manner. It is inserted between the two adjacent heddles on the first harness and through the eye of a heddle on the second harness. So in this picture here, okay, basically you have where you've got one thread is going through the first harness through the eye of a heddle, and then coming out on the other side between two heddles. There's only one eye on each heddle. And then you have in the next warp thread, rather, you have it going through the two heddles, and then going through the eye of the heddle in the next frame, and that's how they alternate. Okay, the third warp thread is treated like the first, the fourth like the second, and so on. Thus, all the odd-numbered threads go through the heddles of the first harness, and all the even-numbered threads go through the heddles of the second harness. Right? Raising the first harness lifts all of the odd number threads, and raising the second harness lifts all the even number threads. Okay. Now, the malacha of setting two heddles is inserting each of the two warp threads. The malacha of setting two heddles is inserting each of two warp threads into an eye of a heddle. So that's the malacha we just said. They translate that as setting two heddles. That means passing the warp thread, right, through two heddles. One on one string, one on the other, one on one frame, one on the other frame. That's the malacha that we just said. Next, after that, the Yud test, the 19th, weaving two threads. This refers to inserting the weft thread twice through the warp threads. For example, right to left and then left to right. When the Mishnah mentions two threads, not mean two individual weft threads. Rather, it refers to the long weft thread which is passed from one side of the loom to the other. Each pass is called a thread since it creates a new line in the cloth being woven. Okay, so in, back, that's what it means to weave two threads. Okay, now. The next is the following. Okay, they continue explaining things here like this. In the loom described above, with the two frames, where you pick up one and picks up all the odd ones and then picks up the even ones. After the odd number of threads have been inserted into the eye of one harness and the even number of threads have been inserted into the eyes of the other harness, one harness is raised and the second is left in place. For example, if the harness that carried the odd number of threads is raised first, it will create a gap between the two sets of threads, with the odd-numbered threads above and the even-numbered ones below. The weft thread can then be passed through this gap across the entire warp in a single pass, going under all the odd-number threads and over all the even-number threads. After the weft thread has been passed through the gap from one side to the other, the odd number threads are lowered and the even number threads are raised. The weft thread is then passed back, this time passing under the even numbered and over the odd numbered ones. Thus, the weft thread goes over each warp thread that it previously went under and under each warp thread it previously went over. The weft thread is passed back and forth in this manner until the cloth is formed. A person who passes the weft thread once in one direction and then back in the other direction has performed the malacha of weaving. So now in this picture, okay, they show you both. They show you how when you pick up, one of the frames, the odd number of threads have been raised. Okay, so now the weft thread is going to go under the raised odd ones and over the even ones. Okay. Then you're going to lower it and do the up and lift up the even ones, do the opposite and pass the thread through that. That's what it means. So again, what they're doing here is they're explaining both ways what it means when you're weaving two threads. If you're not doing a fancy schmancy, loom, right? You're just kind of doing it by hand, like in this picture over here. Where we don't do with the loom and you kind of do with your hand, pass it through back and forth. That's one way to do it. And continuing from the previous malacha of making two heddles, and then after that, going ahead and weaving two threads, the process then of weaving two threads with that whole contraption with the heddles happens when you lift up one, pass it through, lower it, lift up the other, and pass it the other direction.
Mechanization.
Exactly. And the last example is brought down here is that means, I shouldn't say last one, but last one for today. The means removing two threads. This refers to removing 2 threads of the weft or the warp from the finished cloth in order to improve it. If, for example, the threads are packed too densely, you're going to remove. So if you remove 2 threads, either of the warp or of the weft, that is doing the malacha of Petzah Shnei Chutin, removing 2 threads. Have a wonderful day. A good Chodesh.
How do you spell handle?